Hello again. So today I'm going to share a little bit about a training I went to last night at our local prison, Fairway Heights Correctional Center, and this is outside of Spokane. And for people who aren't aware of this, our prison systems in this country really completely rely on volunteers to help make positive changes for the inmates while they're there. And the people who run the prisons are very, familiar with all the various needs of a prison, and so they put you through a training before you become a volunteer. And so at the Abbey, we've been involved with prison work for a number of years on different projects and different things like visiting inmates and writing inmates and producing Buddhist materials for inmates. And the prison environment is a very difficult place to live. It's quite stark in most of them. This is a particularly nice prison, actually. It has grass outside, and it has more than one color on the walls, and has some artwork in different places. And even where the inmates are, it has grass, which is not the case in a lot of prisons. And the staff are quite kind people and very receptive and have really been helpful to the various programs. And then the chaplain in particular has very much a diverse viewpoint that he brings to his job. And he came as part of the training last night and spoke to us. He spoke a little bit about his background, where he made quite a transformation in his own life from being kind of a corrections officer who investigated deaths, work injury deaths. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about his lifestyle being not so ethical in some ways. And he knew from his own heart that you can make a transformation, and he did in his life. And so he brings that to the table with the people that he works with. Mm-hmm. And they have, what did he say? They have 2,200 inmates at the prison, and they have over 70 services every week, religious services every week or something like that. It might have even been more. So much more than he can do. So he appreciates the help. And the other volunteers that were there were very, some of them were real new, but they had really wonderful ideas that they were bringing. Besides, there were a number of educators there last night, and they're bringing books, scholastic books, to share with the children of the visitors. So they're going to try to connect the families up with their children with books, and they're going to give the books to the kids to go home. So there's really wonderful ideas that people bring in the prison system. Through the volunteer coordinator, does what they can to facilitate these within an environment that then they have to train you about. That's of course quite sometimes dangerous, actually. And so there's a lot of training about how to prevent and handle and prepare yourself for the different kind of things that happen in prisons. So it wasn't the most inspiring training in that regard, because it's 3 hours of really hearing a lot of kind of things that are, you'd rather maybe not think about, I would say, but that are very good to hear in terms of being very, so that you can be helpful. And I think the big take-home message, a few things I said that I found interesting, and I will think about more. One, the biggest one was, at least the one guard came and explained how to interact, and he said, we don't have relationships with the inmates. They always call them offenders, actually. We don't have relationships with the offenders. We have rapport. So they always try to develop a rapport with them as a human being, but they don't try to develop relationships, because those become fraught with difficulties in that environment. And they spend a lot of time describing the kind of things that come up and that you need to be careful of so that you don't run into problems, so that when you're there volunteering, that you're actually able to do what you're there for and not get brought into a lot of different kinds of problems that can happen, especially through being manipulated. And there's crime within prisons, and you're kind of like a target, actually, in some ways. because you are a source to the outside for an inmate. And that's very much the case. So they're really taught to be firm, consistent, and fair, and to be have very clear, a lot of clarity about why you're there, and not, I think a lot of it has to do with, because we're human beings, we tend to sometimes want to meet our needs with people that we're around a lot. And that's not always going to be the best way to go into this situation. So, yeah, it was a really good thing, and I'll be going 4 times a year as part of the Buddhist group that's been at this prison for many years. I think it's like 14 years now, maybe, that a local group in Spokane has been sponsoring this group. So I'm quite looking forward to it, and I feel quite happy to have had this training. It made me think about things that I learned in other areas in my life but hadn't really applied to this one, in terms of thinking preventatively and being more aware of the surroundings, where the exits are, where the phones are, where the fire equipment is, so that, if you need to call someone, you already know when you walk in a room where things are. Just kind of preparing the mind for different scenarios that can come up. And then having the specifics about what you should and shouldn't be doing there, in terms of, like, even simple things, like, for instance, here we had a CPR training the other day. You don't do that in a prison. You don't touch an inmate except for shaking the hands is it. And so if an inmate goes down, they have a system all set up there, and you just use their system, and you don't start CPR on an inmate. You call their team, and they come in, and they're right there. It doesn't take long for anything to happen. So, it's just a different environment, and you have to, kind of good to go through a training and learn about it. And so that helps me, because I feel like I have this training a little bit, and I can just really stay focused on why we're there and not get involved in things that won't be suitable and won't help that purpose. So